views and opinions expressed do not necessarily reflect those of Access Fort Wayne, the Allen County Public Library, or any other supporting groups.
Good evening, I'm Eric Hackley, and this is HackonomicsTV. I'm back after a 2-year absence from a 30-year run of producing and hosting live call-in talk shows on Fort Wayne, Indiana, public access television. The reason you haven't been seeing me or hearing from me is I was kicked out of studios and kicked off the air. I went searching for answers, and I stumbled upon the writings and video commentaries of Neely Fuller Jr. and Dr. Frances Cress Welsing. After reviewing them, I feel more enlightened about the motivations of some people. I feel the show is more diversified, because now, in addition to watching the videos on YouTube, you can read about these same people by going to frostillustrated.com, and I'm more focused on the needs and concerns of Fort Wayne Black people. This next episode features Mr. Rubin Brown from Biloxi, Mississippi. Rubin, as a kid, took part in a voter registration campaign in the early 1960s when it was very dangerous and a lot of folks got killed down there. At this time, I'd like to present Mr. Rubin Brown and his story. Now, you're from Biloxi, Mississippi.
Yes.
And you grew up there. What was it like growing up there, as a young kid, being socialized a whole bit?
Well, it was like any other city. You knew your place. We lived back of town in the Negro section or the colored section of town, which starts at the railroad and goes to pretty much the bay, Back Bay. Biloxi is an isthmus surrounded by three sides by water. The main street, the center of town, is probably Main Street or Division Street, and after Division Street, between the railroad and Division Street or the Back Bay, African Americans lived in a pretty much concentrated area.
So what do you mean by they knew their place?
Well, we was, you knew you'd come to the back door. You knew to say yes ma'am and no ma'am, regardless of the age of a white person. You knew that you couldn't go to the bus stop. You could go, the Greyhound bus station, you could get a meal, but you had to eat it on the colored side, or you had to eat it outside.
Even though that was the norm of the time, how did blacks feel about that? Were they upset about that, or did they just go along with the program?
They had no other alternative, because to do anything less meant you were putting your life in jeopardy.
So at that point in history, the blacks weren't organizing themselves to fight just the local things like that?
Well, the NAACP became, quote, quote, the radical thing. In the early 60s, they did probably one of the most radical things, and that was try to integrate the beach, which was 26 miles of public area. But blacks wasn't allowed to use the beach. You could fish there, but you couldn't swim in that dirty Gulf of Mexico. Not that we wanted to, but just the idea of that Biloxi was surrounded by three sides with water, and we could not swim in it.
So were you one of the ones who jumped in the water when the blacks decided to?
No, we did that later on. We just went. If it was 1 and 2, no one said anything, so we swam in it pretty frequently. I learned to swim at a young age, because we go fishing, we just take a spill. Okay. White folks didn't mind if it's 1 or 2, but if you bring 10 of us, oh my God, or 15 or something like that.
Okay, well tell me, growing up in that environment, what led you to the civil rights, what got you interested in the civil rights?
Well, my mom had joined the civil rights in the 60s. She joined the NAACP in the early 60s, like 61 or 60. And that was a time of tremendous growth. And the church we went to, God dang, the church we went to was, well, I guess you could say it was kind of like Union. It was the oldest Baptist church in the city and the most prominent. And it was 3 doors down from my house, so I had no other alternative. On top of that, they had other programs. They had the Boy Scout, that and the AME church had the Boy Scouts. So those were the 2 leading churches. And since I was so close and everybody I knew was in the Boy Scouts, I wanted to join the Boy Scouts. It was impressive, you know, the uniforms. I liked uniforms, you know, salute and do all that thing, all those types of things. So my mother thought it would be good for me, and I thought it was good, and it was.
So now, how did the Boy Scouts get you closer to the civil rights arena?
The president of the NAACP, who was also a member of my church, who also was probably the most prominent doctor in town, and he was a Jackson State grad, and he talked about, he went to Howard University for med school, and he, did a very good job. He was an interesting man. He knew his history, and he always talked black history to us. But that didn't kind of get me on until I met this man named Mr. Hatchett. Now, his sister was secretary of our church, and I knew her really well. She was a 6th grade teacher, and she was a dang good teacher, a disciplinarian, but he was a drunk. And he had good reasons to be a drunk, because this man had fought in WW1 or the Korean War. Well, he had been in several wars, I guess, and he was an old man. And he lived around the corner from me, and he used to walk down to the corner, my street, and go up my street, and at the end of my street was a tavern. So he'd get his drink on and stagger back home. That's all he ever did. And one day, I just decided to mess with him. And so I said, Hatchet, you drunk. He said, and you dumb. I was offended. I said, well, you're drunk and dumb. He says, I know something and you don't know anything. And I said, well, what do you know that I need to know? He said, you don't know nothing about your history. I answered, black people don't have a history. He said, that's what I'm saying, you dumb. He said, you don't know who Hiram Revel is. I said, well, who was it? He said, he was the first senator from the state of Mississippi. I lost it then. I said, I know you lying now. A black man ain't never been no senator. And he said, like I said, you dumb. And walked on, staggered on home. So the next day I go to school, I find this book by Langston Hughes and Metzer. And this was in the early 60s, like 60 or 61. Can't remember, and so I opened the book up and I decided to check the book out. So I took the book home and read the book.